this video we're going to talk about tattoo removal in general. We're going to give you an overview of the main ways in order to remove tattoos, and if you're interested then you can find more information on the relevant web page. But this video is just to give you a summary of the content of the particular web page which we're going to look at right now. So in this particular video we're going to see some of the options that you can use to remove tattoos. We try to cover them all, but maybe not all are covered, and we're also going to touch briefly into laser tattoo removal. But let's move ahead immediately onto the relevant web page. So the relevant web page at the moment is located just under tattoos. So when you hover over tattoos, you'll find it under tattoo removal there. But we'll try not to change the permalink, which is there. So this is what it is today, but it should remain the same over time, even when we change theme and so on. So we're going to move immediately to talk about this particular page, and we show one picture to start with, which is we're going to shut it right now. We're trying to magnify it, and okay, so this picture is meant to show you how the tattoo fades over one mild laser treatment. So the difference in tattoo is not particularly it is not really a lot. So there is some fading, but it's not excessive anyway. So, and this is what you normally find after tattoo removal using lasers, because the fading is usually not really evident or dramatic most of the times after laser tattoo removal. And what do we have here is just a graph showing about the type of personnel which is allowed to perform tattoo removal, and I think in the US very likely, but in Europe there's no legislation Europe-wise that obliges tattoo removal practitioners to be medical doctors or nurses or anything. Sometimes there's different types of legislations according to different councils in the UK. Sometimes, say for example, in Nottingham area, you would need a license in order to remove tattoos and perform aesthetic treatments, whereas in other parts of the UK that may not be the case. It's just a matter of you get the right insurance. So it's not from a European point of view, it's not heavily regulated. There's not any particular license Europe-wise that you need to get in order to remove tattoos, and locally it changes from council to council. And we found that, say for example, in London area, mostly councils don't impose any restrictions or licensing on this sort of types of businesses, which in our opinion is quite good. But that doesn't apply in the United States and some other countries, but this applies in Europe, so it's not heavily regulated in Europe. So this is just a picture showing the same tattoo just when it was just after it healed, and then 13 years later, just to show you the difference. But this is a better picture, because tattoos are meant to be there for a long time, and depending on how the tattoos have been drawn, then they can fade over time anyway. So although they're made to stay, tattoos will fade over the long period of time, but this fading process is so slow that they're actually permanent. So that's something to bear in mind. So, and what we're doing with tattoo removal or tattoo fading procedures is to try and accelerate that process, really. And this is a picture showing you tattoo removal using a laser, where what we're doing is we're trying to break the pigment pigments inside the skin. As you remember in the previous video and the previous page where we talked about where tattoos are located, they're located inside the dermis. So whatever way you're looking to use to fade a tattoo, you have to get into the dermal layer. There's no way around it. So this is why, like tattooing, tattoo removals are also invasive. So tattooing is as an invasive procedure where you cause a wound in order to inject the tattoo inside the dermal layer, and tattoo removal are or tattoo fading procedures are another way to try and remove from the dermal layer those pigments, and normally is quite difficult to remove them completely using fading techniques, including lasers, especially depending on how the tattoos were drawn and the type of ink being used. So, but the basic gist of tattoo removal using lasers is that we try to break the pigments every time by burning the pigments inside the dermal layer. And we're just going to jump onto the next picture. This is a picture showing one of the reactions that you can get after a tattoo removal procedure. In this particular case, we've got a keloidal formation. And we had a case in Amsterdam where a boy had a keloidal formation after tattoo removal procedure using lasers. So it can happen, unfortunately. And this is something that cannot be avoided simply because any tattoo fading procedure has to attack the dermal layer. So when you touch the dermal layer, you can get a number of reactions, including keloidal formations, if you're prone to them. So we're going to jump onto the next picture right now. This is a tattoo surgical excision. And it is our opinion that sometimes it is much, much better to go through surgery than going through tattoo fading procedures. And this is because, and this does not apply to all tattoos, of course, only to certain tattoos where it's actually practical to do so. And we're showing one example where it's very, very practical, and this is on the arm area here. And it's very practical because normally people have excess skin on the arm. So what you do, you just kill two birds with one stone. You just make an incision that way, and then you sew it up. Now, and then this is the end result soon after the procedure. And although this is not done all the time, depending on where the tattoo is located, it may be the very best option, because in one surgical procedure you get rid of the whole thing. Yes, you may be left with a scar, but as we'll see, most tattoos cannot be removed completely seamlessly. That's a fact of life. Some tattoos can, but these are the exception. These are the exception to the rule. As a rule, normally using lasers, even voltaic plasma, tattoos are very difficult to fade completely, and there's going to be, especially if you use lasers, some sort of mark left there after the procedures. And personally, we've seen several, especially after laser tattoo removal. So it is, in our view, for most tattoos, talking about 80% of tattoos, or if not even more, is practically unrealistic to be able to remove tattoos seamlessly, completely, without leaving any trace of ink and leaving any trace of the tattoo being there in the first place. So it's much easier to have a tattoo done than having it removed completely by using normal standard tattoo fading procedures. And this is why we see a tattoo excision to be one of the best options whenever feasible, because within one session you get rid of the whole lot. Yes, you do get a scar later on due to the excision, but the scar will fade over time, little by little, and you'll get a mark in most cases anyway. So it is always better to avoid having a tattoo done in the first place. This is a subjective opinion anyway. So this is another example where a tattoo excision is much better and convenient than a normal fading procedure using lasers or other techniques, because in here, due to the nature of the tattoo, what you do, just make the eye incision, and then you sew it up. Tattoo is gone forever. And yes, you're left with a scar which will fade little by little over time. But some cases it's much better to get a scar like that than another type of mark, and going through several tattoo removal or tattoo fading sessions. Now, we're going to jump onto the next picture, and this is salation. Is a technique which is we use with the beauty tech and our devices for tattoo removal. So we first use the plasma in order to break down the pigments, and then we apply the salt, sterile salt, in various ways, either using a sterile solution with loads of salt and use osmosis that way, or applying salt immediately, sterile salt on the area that's been treated. And that is because the results are extremely good in terms of fading. The fading is very dramatic, especially if compared to most laser tattoo removal procedures. And it's not a new technique. It's been used for several years, hundreds of years, because tattoos are not new either. They've been used for several years, and since tattoos have been invented, people have hated them at a certain point in their lives. Therefore, since the dawn of time, the dawn of tattoos, people tried to find ways in order to remove them. And salt, sodium chloride has been one of the ways it's been used. I mean, at the beginning, it was used by rubbing the salt on top of the tattoos, scrubbing the tattoo a number of times, having the tattoo to heal, the tattooed area to heal, and then after the healing process, then the tattoo faded slightly. But then we have lasers and other techniques and so on, and as well as plasma with osmosis, which is the same as applying sterile salt on top. So this is a technique which has been used for several years, and at the beginning, as I've mentioned before, it was just rubbing the salt, using force on the tattoo in order to scrub it, and having the osmosis effect to take place. And empirically, this is a good way in order to fade the tattoos. Now, and this is the osmosis. What we're doing when we apply salt inside the tattoo, we are drawing the particles, the broken particles of the broken pigments of the tattoo towards the salt, therefore towards the surface of the tattoo. And then when the crusting, the scabbing takes place, the tattoo is less bright as it was before. And that is the basic principle of tattoo fading using salt. And this is another picture using tattoo fading and salt, and the results are extremely good, much better than you'd get normally with laser tattoo removal. And here is another example of tattoo removal using abrasion and salt. If I remember well, it's been written a number, I think a year ago, this article, so I have to get my head around it. So, but you can read the details on the webpage anyway. This is a video, so you have a gist of what is inside. So some people prefer to have a video summary. This is another video showing you the mechanical scrubbing of a tattoo. It's quite bloody. It's a quite bloody video. So, and also people don't like blood. This is one of the reasons why this is not a technique that is widely used. So if you if you don't mind having a bloody procedure where blood is going to be shed, you might as well just chop it off and sew it using excision. So it's not a very popular way of removing or fading a tattoo, more fading than removing it. And this TCA. There's nothing against TCA or using any chemical peels in order to fade the tattoos. We don't see any reason to talk badly about it. There are people talking badly about it because somehow they're effective anyway, so they're in competition with the expensive lasers. So people tend to say that it's dangerous, and in practicality, scars do take place after tattoo removal lasers, even with the most expensive lasers, as well as sometimes TCA and other peels to fade the tattoos. So TCA is another way of trying to fade the tattoos, and it's not a quick fix either, and it takes a number of sessions in order to fade them. But we'll talk about what happens right now. We'll take advantage of this picture to talk about what happens in tattoo fading procedures. What normally happens is tattoos cannot be faded completely seamlessly. What people do is they go through a number of sessions of laser tattoo removal. Sometimes they use TCA, voltaic plasma, and so on. And then when the tattoo is faded to a good extent, they cover them up with another tattoo on top. This is what happens in most cases, in 80 to 90% of the cases, because once again, 80% of the cases it's not feasible to remove a tattoo completely, leaving the area as if nothing had happened before. There's always going to be a mark or something left. And this is just a graph showing you the difference between IPL and lasers. Lasers are focused source of lights which have got a certain wavelength, which sometimes, depending on the device you're using, you can select that wavelength. Other times you've only got a number of wavelengths, or depending again on the manufacturing of the lasers. Whereas the intense pulse light has got a number of wavelengths all at once. So it's you've got a number of colors in there. So it's not as narrow as in terms of bandwidth as a normal laser. So in lasers you have a number of frequencies, one or two, mixed inside the laser. In an IPL you have a broad spectrum of frequencies, like the broad spectrum that you get from sunlight on normal lamps and so on. But also IPL has been used for laser tattoo fading, but they're not popular for this application. More popular for hair removal. And this is another picture showing IPL and what wavelengths penetrate inside the inner part of the skin where the pigments are located, and where the pigments are located, also the bulb of the hair is located as well. So if you want to remove both, you may go as well. If you want to fade both, you may as well try IPL. And also this picture shows you how the longer wavelengths tend to penetrate deeper inside the skin, and this is true in general way with also with ultrasound and so on, because say for example ultrasound, the shorter the wavelength, the less the wavelength the wave can penetrate inside the skin. The longer the wavelength, the more it penetrates inside the skin. So it's just basics of principle about light propagation inside bodies and skin, as well as sound propagation inside bodies and skin. There's some correlation in there. But we're not going into the physics too much, because it may be going to confuse you. But this is another way of removing or fading tattoos, is to say using deep cold. It's not particularly used for this application. Mostly, as we know, as lasers that are publicized for tattoo fading, but you can use also deep cold. And this is what happens in reality. Normally, you have a tattoo, you're not particularly happy with it, or part of it in particular. So, what you do, you just go through a number of fading. So, in the left, you've got the beginning of the tattoo, and you try to cover it up, and then you say, well, maybe we've got to fade a bit more of this part of the tattoo. So, you go through a laser tattoo removal or fading session or two, depending how much it fades, and then after a while the area is healed, then you just go and cover it up with another tattoo on top. So because otherwise then, say for example in this case, the bottom would be evident, so you try and cover it up, and they're called double layer tattoos, and even double layer tattoos are even more difficult to remove or to fade, which is better. This is another picture showing tattoo fading, and so and then the cover up after that. So just as an example, a practical example, what happens when people are not happy with tattoos, they get to fade them to a certain extent, as we see in the middle of the picture, and then they have it covered up later on. So when you hear about tattoo removal, don't think it's going to be removed, because in 80% of the cases it's not going to be removed. In reality, it's going to be faded to a certain extent, and then it's going to be covered up with something else. We're going to talk about briefly adverse effects, and this is a laser in particular. You can see the frosting in there. This is not an adverse effect, it's just a normal reaction of the skin to the blast of the laser, which is going to go away immediately. There's some minor bleeding that can occur after laser tattoo removal, or other removal, even using plasma, IPL, and so on. Because always, you remember, we've got to get into the dermal layer. So one way or another, we've got to get in there, and the dermal layer is full with blood supply and blood vessels. So you can get some blood getting out of the area as you perform the procedure, even using lasers and other techniques. And this is nothing to be worried about. It just happens. This is the frosting soon after a laser tattoo removal procedure. It's quite a good picture because it shows you two things: the frosting in one way, and also the redness around the tattoo. The redness tends to start half an hour after the area has been treated. Then this is the blistering of a tattoo after a laser removal session. This is not an adverse effect. This is a very normal reaction to laser tattoo removal. It's just not advertised. It's covered up as possible. So manufacturers and clinics will try not to talk about it at all, but this is a normal reaction to laser tattoo removal, fading, whatever way you'd like to call it. It's a very normal reaction. It happens all the time with no exception. The less intense the tattoo fading session using a laser, the smaller is going to be the blistering. So blistering is always to be taken into account, and they will talk about it in the consent form if you're going to undergo a laser tattoo removal session anyway, because they have to talk about it. They cannot actually cover it up. So cover it up. This is one of the things that we find a bit funny about tattoo removal. The tattoo removal business is that something that happens all the time is actually very difficult to find on the internet and other sources, because people try not to talk about this normal side effects. Now, this is the crusting after the scabbing after a patch test on tattoo removal, which has got to fall off on its own accord. Now, the area can be itchy during the healing process, and it's normally is a normal reaction. There's nothing to be worried about. There can be a number of reactions like swelling and infections, and they're not normally due to the treatment itself, especially if they're infection and swelling due to an infection. Infections can happen, they normally happen due to a poor aftercare of the tattoo, also with laser tattoo removal. and there's another side effect of redness, and I think it was an infection, an early onset of infection. And yes, and then you can get scarring of different types, also using lasers. What you'll find is that they're not going to be seamless results in most cases, and this is one of the most common results of laser tattoo removal sessions or laser tattoo fading. So you still see some minor traces of the ink in there, but also you see the hypopigmented area, which is a normal side effect, permanent side effect of laser. So there's nothing you can do about it. Hypopigmentation normally happens after a number of sessions of laser tattoo removal, and after a number of laser tattoo removal sessions, and sometimes cannot be avoided, and they've got to be expected. So, and we've seen several of these hypopigmentation cases, as well as keloidal formation and so on. So this is the end of this particular article. We hope that you find this video useful, and if you have any question, please feel free to get in touch, and we're very keen to hear from you. And if you'd like to have more topics covered, please let us know. And once again, thank you very much for watching.